Welcome to the next in the series of videos on UI Builder. If you want to follow along with this, I will post some code in the information below so that you can follow it yourself. Please note that I'm using the latest version of UI Builder, which is currently version 6.4.0. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can very simply and quickly set up a form for getting user input back into Node-RED. To get us going, I've started with a standard setup for UI Builder. So we have a UI Builder node right here. And nothing special about this, it's just the blank template, so no changes to any code, and no libraries installed or anything else, so absolutely standard. You may notice that version 6.4 has got yet another little button here at the top, which is the same as this link here. If you're running on the local host, this gives you access to VS Code for doing editing of the files. Just a nice little simple thing to use. But we don't need to do any of that in this example. So how do we get going? First thing to note is that I've got a split screen here. This is the actual output right here. Here we have the debug log. And so if I turn that one on temporarily and force that to reload, you can see that we got the disconnect and the connect message out of this debug node here, which is what we'd expect. And as always, loads of information in here should you need to use it. Okay, so we don't need that for the moment, so I'm going to turn that off and clear that. Okay, so the next thing to do then is get right into it. And to get started, we need this node here, the UIB Element node. And it defaults to a simple table. And this is the zero code part of UI Builder, which hopefully, if you've seen the other videos, you'll have already seen. Default settings here, so it's going to attach whatever output this sends onto the body of your HTML page. That's the visible part of the page, and we can change that because in all of our example templates we have a div tag called more, and so that's how we tell the output from here to be attached to the more tag as opposed to the body tag. And we want to change this to simple form. And that's all we need to do here. There is nothing else to do unless we want to put in a heading. So let's do that now. I'll put this in as text, but obviously you can do it in a variety of ways. And have a simple form. Nothing else needs changing. Click on done. Now, to get that to work, we need to do two things. First of all, we need to connect the output of this to the input of this. You'll notice that I've got two inputs here, one that bypasses the cache and one that goes through the cache. Talk about the cache later, so we'll go directly into this first. So to do that, we need a link out node, connect that to there, and connect that to there. So that's good. And now we need to provide the form with some data. To do that, obviously you can inject this data in many other ways. You could extract from a database or whatever it is you want to do. Here we're just going to very simply use an inject. And I've prepared some data already. So let's just have a quick look at this. So you will see hopefully that this data is JSON data, so it's actually an array. So starting with the square brackets means that we've got an array or a list of data, and each of the entries in that list is a JavaScript object as denoted by the curly brackets. An object has key and value pairs. and a series of those. So each of these has pretty much the same set of keys with different data. And to set up a form, all we need is this kind of data. So we give an ID to every form element, which means that we can identify the data coming back in again more easily. I've just given them very simplistic names there. You might want to put something a bit more meaningful in there. And then we need to say what type of input we're wanting. Now, you can look this up online. This is taken from standard HTML. So the input tag in HTML has many different types that you can use. And we're mirroring that here. So text input, color selection, a date, a range of numeric values, and a button. And we'll see how that button works in a moment. But yeah, that's just a small selection of the different types of data that you can include. And then you'll see that there's a few more tags. These are all described in the documentation for Node-RED, of course. Sorry, for UI Builder. So please do make use of that. So each of these will create an input in our form. Do we want it to be required? So false obviously is no, but here we've got one that is true, so that we can see how that works. A label. So each of the input fields needs a label so that your users understand what to input. Again, very, very simple. And you don't have to do this, but optionally you can include a starting value. And that's what this does. It's effectively the default value. And each of these has a different type of value. Not bothered to put one in for the date, but you could. Here on the range, you'll notice we've got some additional attributes as well. So although we're starting with a default value of 20, we're telling it that the minimum value will be 0 and the maximum will be 100. So that HTML, your browser, will actually limit you as to what you can put in there. And finally, we have the button. So buttons are an input field, but they don't use the input tag, they use a button tag. But again, same principles apply. We've got a label and we can have a value. Typically, you wouldn't bother to put a value on the button, but you can if you want to. So let's copy that data. Copy that into the clipboard. Come out of there, come into here. And it's the payload that controls the UIB element at the moment. So we change that to be a JSON input. And I could paste it straight in there, but we've got a JSON editor which formats things for us nicely. Click on the format button just to make sure that I didn't make any mistakes. So that's the data. And that data is what we're going to send into the UIB element node. That is going to convert it to UI Builder's low code format. And we'll actually have a look at that in a moment. And then it's going to send it on into the UIB UI Builder node, which in turn is going to send it to the front end. And the client library in the front end is going to reconstitute that data into HTML. Sounds complicated, but in fact isn't. So now we've got everything ready, we can run that inject and see it flow through into the page. And there it is. So as you can see, we've got 4 input fields and a button. You'll notice that the button is color-coded, and that's because this input field is marked with a red ring, showing that that's a required field. We didn't have to put things like that in. We didn't have to do any color coding on here. It does all that for you if you're using the standard UIB brand CSS file. And you can see that if we make a change to this and actually set it to a valid thing, that goes green, everything else is green, and so this returns to the normal color. We can make changes in this. We can do whatever we want with these things, and we can do whatever we want in there. So that's as you expect any form to be. As you can see, again, the default CSS puts a ring around the whole form, and here we have our heading. So now if I press the button, we get immediately some information back. You'll see that that comes out of the standard output port here at the top. And the first thing to look at is the payload. So as usual with Node-RED, we expect the payload to contain something useful. And here you'll see that each of these is named after the named input field, the ID. So that's why you want to always put an ID on your input fields. And you can see that we've got the text, we've got the color string here that the debug panel even recognizes as a color. We've got the date, and we have our number there, and we have the value that we set onto the button as well. So that's a summary. However, there is a lot more to it than that. So if we now look at the _UI property, we can see we've got a lot more information here. And this all comes from this button here. This button uses one of UI Builder's standard functions called event send. And as you can see, there it is, event send. We called the button R5. We have the text that's in the slot which appears on the button in the case of a button. I'll come back to that in a moment. We have the usual properties on the button, in this case none. Similarly with attributes, we can see all the different attributes. There's the event send. When you click the button, that's what happens. So all of those are there. We haven't set any classes on there, but obviously you could do, they would appear there. And you'll also notice that we know what the event was, click. And you can see that the different key combinations that you might hold down here are also listed. So if I held down, let's say the Windows button, which is the meta key on a Windows keyboard, when I click the button, if I held that down, that would be true rather than false. Similarly, if I held the shift key when I press the button, that would be true. So you can actually make your buttons do a lot more if you want them to. Page name, in case you need to filter things out. The client ID, which is stable whilst you've got the browser open, and the tab ID, similarly, is stable while the browser's open. So let's have a look at the form data. So the first thing you'll notice is that the form has a property here called valid, and if the whole form was valid, then that is true. If one of the fields was invalid, that would be false. And then we can drill down into each of the input fields, and we can see a bit more detail, and we can keep drilling down. And one of the things that this standard setup does is it puts some additional events onto each input field that lets you track the old and the new value. So the old value was the default, and then the new value was what we typed in. So that way you can actually compare the two values should you need to. And similarly, that should work for all of the others as well. So that may be helpful from time to time. You can also see, of course, whether or not the input was valid or not. And I don't know anything else. I'll just have a look at the range one. Yeah, so that's all that we have there. Similarly, the button, no data on that one. So there you have it. You have the data from the form all wrapped up automatically, no code required at all. And you can see the simple payload return, or you can drill into the detail of the form should you need to. And really, that's it for a form. specify what you want in the form, send it through to the UIB element node with the right typeset, send that output into your UI Builder node. It comes out here, get the user input, comes out here. Not much more to it, really. So hopefully you can see that that's a very, very easy way to build up an input form. And of course, there are lots of other types of input. Have a look at that online. Again, the UI Builder documentation has the details and links to online resources. If you want to capture an email address or a telephone number, or you want to do some custom input formatting, all of those things are possible. Dates, times, loads of different things that native HTML supports straight out of the box with very little effort. So hopefully you'll find that useful. Obviously, then you can use that data however you like in your flows. We haven't really talked about the caching. Obviously, at the moment, if I press refresh on here, we lose the form, and that's because this goes into the non-cached side of things. So let's just change that now. So let's move. Let's select that and move it to there instead. So now it's going to come into the cached side of the form, and you'll notice that we have the link here that comes out of the control outputs back into the cache. And that's very deliberate, because when you connect a new client or when you refresh the page, obviously you get the disconnect and connect. The connect message actually triggers the cache to send the data to the newly connected client. So let's see how that works. There we go. We're going to inject, and we forgot to unconnect the old version, so that didn't work very well. And we've also got a warning, which I'll clear in a second. Let's just refresh that page. There we go. So let's try that again, shall we? And the reason that this didn't update is because by default the cache needs a topic, and a topic of blank is no good. So let's just give that a topic. Click that, send that. Now you can see that topic entries is 1, and we've got a bit of a weirdness there going on, but now you can see that we have our form. I think the reason for that is, yep, I didn't give it an ID. And you must always give these things an ID, otherwise, as you saw before, it was starting to create more entries because it didn't know that it could update an existing entry because it had no way of identifying it. So always give an ID. Redo that. Now we probably will get a no. So this has got the same topic name, and the cache is currently set to cache by topic, which means that when we submit this, we still only get 1 entry. We got 2 forms because the first one had no ID on it. But when we do that now, and that should, yeah, that's now working. So don't fall for those issues. Make sure you always add an ID when you're using the UIB element node. That ID needs to be unique for your page. And similarly, when you're using the cache with its default settings, make sure that you send through a topic name so that the cache works correctly. But now you have it. Whenever someone connects to that page, they will automatically get the form every single time, and which hopefully you'll see is really quite useful. One final thing to note, if you want a smaller width of window, you'll notice that the default settings on the form make that a vertical layout as opposed to a horizontal layout, which is the default. That's again automatic thanks to the UI Builder brand CSS file. That's it. A form. Job done. Hope you enjoyed that video. Nice and short. See you again in the next one. Bye for now.